Okay, so I'll start a bit introducing myself and what I'm doing here this morning. A few years back, like this was agriculture to me. It was my mom's front yard. I didn't know much about plants except that they needed light to do photosynthesis. I was starting with pretty much no knowledge of how greenhouses or growing plants. And then I got the chance to travel, and as a hopeless romantic, I fell in love with a Taiwanese girl. So that's how I ended up in Taiwan, in Taipei. And over there, you could see like a weird mix of modern and traditional world. You can see Lamborghini's cars in front of people doing Tai Chi in front of a temple like this one. So that was a weird time for me. I was a bit confused with all the cultural clash. But one thing that kind of surprised me the most was how local farmers over there were really present in people's plate compared to what I knew here in Canada. You could go like everywhere you had markets like this one, where you have like a huge variety of food that you couldn't find in the supermarket. It was like a lot of different foods that I didn't know about as well. So fruits, vegetables, and also whatever you can imagine as transformed food. So like people were doing tofu and selling it in the market, and I don't know how to say that in English, but like bao bao and dumplings and so on and so forth. So you could have you would have like all that like big variety of food that was produced or grown by small local farmers. And even when you were going to restaurants, you could see that they were getting their ingredients from the market, and it felt really fresh, healthy. And talking to people with like the few Mandarin word that I knew, I felt really more satisfying too that what I was used to at home. So when I came back to Canada, I really missed like that proximity with the food, and here everything felt more manufactured, coming from far away or full of unpronounceable stuff. So that's when I started to realize that here, compared to over there, like the food system was really different. And in Taiwan and other countries that I got a chance to visit, like small farmers are really at the center of the food system, while here the small farmers are more marginalized. And about these times when I was thinking about all that, like the friend came to me, and he was working in a small greenhouse as a grower there, and he was looking for automation solutions to help him, because you guys know like labor is a problem in agriculture, and well, nowadays pretty much everywhere. So he was looking for someone to help him like develop a greenhouse automation system for small growers, and that's what we've been working on in the last few years. We started by, like you can see in the picture, we had like a special operation desk in the greenhouse where we're trying a lot of things and see how it could work. And now we've installed like the system we developed in more than 200 greenhouses, and we're realizing that automation is cool and it's helping, but it's not the only need that people have. There's also like a big need of information around how to grow in greenhouses, because it's really a finicky job. It's really there's a lot to know to be able to have a great yields in greenhouses. And since there's a lot of investment, we have to be as effective as possible. So today, what I want to share with you is pretty much what I learned in those last few years, where we've been working on greenhouses, installing it, like getting feedback from growers, from greenhouse experts as well, and researchers. And well, we have accumulated a lot of knowledge, and I have material for about, I don't know, 12 hours, but I tried to make a big summary of everything. So it's kind of a greenhouse automation 101 course this morning. As I said, if you have questions, do not hesitate to ask them in the chat, or just unmute your microphone to ask it. Don't worry about it. And I'm not gonna say everything I would like to, but at the end, you can ask question, or you can tell me what if you would like to have more information of a certain topic, and then we can maybe see if we can create content for you guys. Okay, so let's start with the game plan. So give you an idea of what I'm going to talk about. So the first part is going to be about like the goals of greenhouse control, what we want to control, and what we can expect from it. Then why we would want to do that. So what will I get from automation? What is the main pitfall of automation? What to plan for if we want to get there to use it? And then, as I said, like questions. If I didn't talk about something, and I would do my best to answer you or direct you in the right direction to find the answers. As I said, we're recording the webinar right now, and after the meeting, we will send you the link to the recording if you want to watch something again, and the PDF of the presentation, so you don't have maybe to take notes or something. Okay, so let's start with the goals. In greenhouses, there's a lot of conditions that we would want to control, but I try to summarize it. And I'd start with context to know what we can expect from it. So what we see here in Quebec for organic growers, mainly that they grow tomato in their greenhouse, or sometimes cucumbers, but we take tomato as the unit, let's say, to make estimates. So what we see is pretty much like people are inexperienced. They start for 1 meter of greenhouse, they produce 18 kilos of tomatoes per year. And the best growers that we see with like the equipment are available for small growers, or typical for small growers, it's around 35 kilos. Like it's pretty much the max that we see here. And the difference between the two, sorry if you guys count more in pounds. I would just use kilos, so it's easier, but I'm sure you can convert it if you need. So yeah, the difference between like inexperienced growers and the best growers that we can see, so for a typical 3,000 square foot greenhouse, it's around $46,000 difference per year. So that's quite a huge difference that we would like everybody, if they can move forward towards that 35 kilos. So that's to give you like a scale of what we can get in a greenhouse. And then I put the potential here, which is more like the big glass house that we see with like our full high-tech, what they manage to get per year. So 75 kilos. The difference between there's a lot of things, since like artificial lighting and then CO2 and things like that. So I'm not going to go there for now, but there's a potential that even small greenhouses could get higher than 35 kilos. Okay, so that's a lot of numbers. It's not going to be as bad for the rest of the presentation. Okay, so if I take it to the simplest version of it, like growing in greenhouses, what it is basically taking the light, which is the limiting element if you don't have artificial lighting, and turning it into tomatoes or vegetables. And how do we do that? Well, there's kind of four big goals that I identified. The first one is we want to maximize growth, obviously. And then the second one is, one second. The second one is balancing the growth, so that we don't want our plants to focus too much on one aspect and neglecting the other. So because it's going to be unbalanced, and then you're going to have problems and your yields are going to drop. So we want to avoid that. So we need to do kind of hint the plant to put his energy at the right place. And then we want to avoid problems. So pest, diseases, deficiencies, and reduce energy costs. That's not for the yields, but for the grower, let's say. And I put on the right part, right-hand side, the icons of what are the conditions we need to achieve those goals. And I'm gonna come back to that later. But basically, those four here, the temperature, humidity, air circulation, and irrigation is the conditions you want to control in your greenhouses as small growers. Okay. So now, why do we want to automate our greenhouses? Obviously, I think everybody expects that, but to save time. So what we often don't think about, though, is all the not just the time it takes to do a specific task, but the time it takes for the whole interruption. So if you forgot to water your plants, you're in your field, you need to walk back to your greenhouse, start the turn on the valve, then wait a few minutes, then turn it off and go back to the field. The whole time takes a lot of times, and even in our brain as like the context switch. Oh yeah, I have to do that. Like it takes a lot of time in the day to do that. And yeah, we can always have laborers or employees, but it's more expensive. It's hard to find. You have to train it. So automation really helps with that. The second point, this where automation can help you, is really increasing your yield. So having a tool that will allow you to maintain the perfect or the right conditions in your greenhouse can help you really get from that 18 kilos to 35 kilos per square meters. And there you have, well, I wrote maximizing photosynthesis. That's an important one, balancing the plants and preventing disease. So pretty much like the goals I mentioned earlier. And automation also, what we get from it are sensors that collect data. And then what we do with that data is, well, most of the time we do nothing because it's hard to get insight from it. But more and more systems are developing good visualization to help us improve our greenhouse management. And the last one is maybe a bit more specific to our system. I don't think other systems do it, but it's really get more knowledge and get more expertise in the greenhouse through the automation system, through the intelligence or artificial intelligence of the system. But I don't think there are other systems affordable for small growers that offers that. I'm going to talk about it a bit more later. The last point, freeing up mental bandwidth. Well, on the farm, there's a lot of things to remember, a lot of things to know, a lot of things to think about, and that's really a burden that the farmers have to bear. So, like by automating, configuring a system once, and then it does what you need, you don't have to think about it. There's a lot to gain there. So that's one point, and then another one would be that we can worry way less because we have alerts that will tell us if something goes wrong. So that's another interesting part here. Less problem, can control. Oh yeah, the remote access. Most systems nowadays have remote access. So if you forget something or if whatever happens, having the control from, for instance, the hardware store is something that is interesting as well to have, and it's reassuring. To know that you can fix things from somewhere else, from anywhere on the globe. Okay, so now what to watch out for. Here, well, yeah, so the example I gave was even NASA does not blindly trust the equipment, and it should be the same for farmers as well. So automation is cool. You can set up your thing, and then you don't have to think about it as much, but it's still important to have some presence in the greenhouse. So if something goes badly, I don't know, some heater bugs or limit switch are loosening up, and then, well, whatever happens, then we notice it before it's too late. So like every once in a while, well, anyway, we do it with when we harvest or weed in the greenhouse, but it's just important to remember that electronics aren't perfect, and a lot of things can happen. And I saw once as well, one of our customer called us and was saying, oh, the automation system doesn't work. And when we were investigating what happened or why it was not working, we realized that it was the cleaning lady that was cleaning the house, and she just disconnected the computer, the controller, so that she could plug in her vacuum cleaner. So there's a lot of things that can happen that we're not, it's hard to predict. So every once in a while, it's good to check that everything is good. But also there's alerts that can help you with that. Okay. So what to plan? So this is the biggest section of the presentation. A lot of people were asking us what to expect price-wise. So I tried to give estimates for everything I presented. Those are rough estimates and depends of your region and the size of the equipment you need and everything. But I tried to go with what I hear for 30 per 100 feet greenhouses for tomato cucumber operation. So not cold cultures, but more warm cultures. Yeah. So most of the equipment in this section, we're not like, for us, we're not selling it. It's more something that goes around automation. But I'm going to present it quickly so that you know you have a better idea of what are needed to automate a greenhouse. So here we have heating devices or furnaces. What we see most are propane or natural gas, but more with the carbon neutrality for 2050, there's more and more states that subsidize electrical heating as well. So that's coming more and more important to know about when you're looking for heating systems. And then biomass that exists but is more expensive. So I'm not going to talk too much about that here. I wanted to mention though the heat distribution, because something we see a lot are heaters that are installed at the top of the greenhouse, like here, and it's cool because they're not in the way. But the problem is, like, heat is going up always. So like when the heater is going to produce heat, it's going to go in the top of the greenhouse, and then it's going to cool there, and the plants aren't going to benefit from it. So when you have a setup like that, you're losing a lot of energy, and you're paying a lot of energy that is not efficient. So that's maybe something we want to avoid. And the other part of this kind of heater is the uniformity in the greenhouse. That is very important, so that you can control efficiently and know when to harvest. And we want every plant to be the same pretty much. And with this kind of system, it's hard because it's really localized heat distribution. What we would recommend is, when you're looking for installing heating system, is to go for a duct system like this with poly-air tube, which will deliver the heat at the bottom of the plants. And with the punch hole in it, it's going to be more uniform for the whole greenhouse. So the plants near to the heater won't burn up, and the one at the back won't freeze. So it's going to be really more uniform. And for the duct delivery system, there's special fan needed, and special heaters are required to allow that. So when you're going to design your system in your greenhouse, just make sure to ask the supplier if you can do that. Second important equipment are ventilation equipments. There's two types. There's mechanical and natural ventilation. Mechanical are basically fans that push air in the greenhouse or out of the greenhouse. Not going to go into too much detail here. Then natural ventilation, what we see most of the time are side curtains. So like it's a motor like this that will just roll the pulley of the greenhouse, so it's going to create an opening for the wind to come in. And the other option is roof openings like this one, but it's really more expensive. It's harder to install, but it's easier if you live in a place where there's snow and ice that get the side curtain stuck and cold at the beginning of the season or at the end of the season. After that, air circulation. What we see more often are HAFs, or horizontal airflow fans, which is the one on the left here. Typically, we see maybe 4 of them in a greenhouse. So they create like they're set up in a way where they make the air go in circle in the greenhouse to make sure that everything is uniform as much as possible. But there's new systems that we're starting to hear about, which is, well, Elite Turbo is a brand, but it's the one on the right here, where it takes the air from the top and bring it back. So if you have heater system like the one we saw earlier that is at the top of the greenhouse, then this can help maybe. I'm just suggesting you to ask your suppliers if you have questions for those equipment, since it's not my my field of expertise. And then irrigation and misting, we have pumps, pressure tanks, solenoid valve. Obviously, there's a lot of fittings and other stuff around it. But what I wanted to say is that most of the time what we see is not, what we do is not automating the pump itself. It's really automating the valve. And the pump is set up with a pressure sensor that would just make it start the second that there's not enough pressure in the irrigation system. So basically, we're just automating the valve, the solenoid valve. One warning maybe for that is when you set up your things, just make sure you don't put your irrigation stuff next to your electrical panel, because if there's a leak or something, that could end up with bad problems. Okay, so now sensors. There's a few sensors that we see in small greenhouses. The first one, the most important one, would be the temperature and humidity sensor. Some systems don't have the humidity sensor, or you have to buy it extra. That's fine, but it's really important that you have the humidity, because that's the big challenge that we have in greenhouses. Like, temperature is quite easy to control, but it's really the humidity that causes more problem, because it's not as natural how we want to control it, and I'm going to talk about that later. But just keep in mind that you need to have a humidity sensor with your system. After that, there's a lot of things we can know about. That's interesting to know about the sensor. Like, if it's wireless, it's easier to install, but then maybe make sure to know what's the range of the wireless system, and also what is the battery lifetime, because you don't want to every month change the battery. You want less maintenance, not more. And then there's two types of sensors. You have like electronic sensors, which are cheaper, and you don't have to do nothing to maintain it. But the problem is that with time, the humidity sensor is gonna drift, and it's gonna be way less precise. And it's less precise from the start as well. The alternative is dry bulb, wet bulb sensors, which is another way of measuring the humidity, basically. And this one is typically more expensive, and you have a bit of maintenance to do. You have to keep like a water in the bottle as in the sensor. And that's for what we notice with our sensor. It's about once every 3 weeks or month that we have to check to make sure everything is fine, and maybe put more water. So it requires more maintenance, but it's more precise, and on the long run, that precision will help you save on energy. So that's why I wrote return on investment here, is because you can maybe save on energy for the humidification. So maybe that's something you want to look for. After that, you need to have a sun shield somehow. You don't want to have like the sensor like the one at the bottom, bare, like directly exposed to the sun, because you're gonna have bad readings. But with the sun shield, once again, there's a precision challenges, because if there's a microclimate that forms in the sun shield, and because there's not enough air going through, then it's other problems that you can face. But people ask us often, where do I put the sensor in the greenhouse? And typically you want to put it in the center of your greenhouse, and you want to keep it at the level of the head of your plant. So when your tomato plants are young and really short, you want to keep it really low. But when at the end of the season, when they're reaching the ceiling, you want to put your sensor at that level. Now irrigation. Here in Quebec, there's been a lot of interest in this with irrigation sensor, especially because it was heavily subsidized. But we saw that many people realized they were irrigating too much. And especially now that the climate is getting drier and drier in the summer, people don't have enough water reserves. So it's it's something that is getting critical to know if you're irrigating properly. There's a few options here. The one at the right are those greenhouse experts would be mad at me if I wouldn't put it there, but it's basically just putting our hands in the soil, and we when we do that, often we get the feel of, is it too dry? Or it's interesting because it also helps us to diagnose when the sensor is acting up or something. I'm going to talk about the different sensors a bit more later. For the outdoor, so weather sensors, we have what we see typically are wind, rain, solar radiation, and then temperature and humidity. Those have different uses, obviously. But I'm seeing the time pass, and I don't want to go too far into details here. If you have questions, just do not hesitate. Okay, so we're getting to the heart of the automation, like the brain of the automation. How do we control everything, and what does it look like? So for the automation brain, like the system you use, just those are a few tips maybe to check before when you're looking up what are the options for automation systems. You want to check, is there remote access? As I said, most systems offer it nowadays, some with subscription, some without. So you want to make sure you have it if that's something that's important to you. Then I think the most important one is if the system is easy to use, because we really often we saw people with like super sophisticated systems that were quite expensive too, but since it was too complicated, they wouldn't use it at its full potential, and then they would just lose a lot of money because they're not taking advantage of all the features that they need. And more often than other, they just scared of changing something because they're scared of messing things up. And since it's complicated, it takes a lot of time. So you don't want to get into that. So my advice here is really find a system that is really not too complex, that is easy to use, and that you won't be afraid to make changes, because during the season, we don't want to have always the same settings. So yeah, that's my best advice when you choose your system. After that, what happens in case of failures? As I said, electronics, there's something that's bound to happen someday. So do you have alerts? What is the warranty? Do you have service available? So maybe that's something you want to look up when you choose the system as well. And how much time you need to maintain optimal condition. Oh yeah, so what are the options, or what are the configurations available that would allow you to think about it, or to change your configuration as rarely as possible? Okay, so I'm gonna pass it, like the different conditions that we want to control. So the small logos I had earlier. So the first one is the temperature. So why should we control the temperature? So the first goal was maximizing growth. So we can help that with temperature control. Then balancing the growth, and once again, the temperature is kind of the lever. I don't know how to pronounce that. Well, we do that with temperature basically, and the important thing is that the temperature has to follow how much light plants receive, because the amount of photosynthesis kind of represent the amount of sugar or energy that the plants have. And if we make the plant grow too fast and there's not enough energy, it's just going to be super weak, and you're going to have a problem bearing fruits later on. So to do that, as I said, we want the temperature to follow the light that the plants receive, as well as controlling the temperature average. Then preventing problems. So when we're going into extreme, so if the plant is freezing, it's going to die. If it's too warm in the greenhouse, then the plants, the flower are going to abort. So then we're going to lose yield. So that's not what we want. And ultimately, reducing costs. What we often see with automation system is it's really hard to find the right configuration. So what we often see is a greenhouse that will heat because it's too cold, and then it's going to get too warm because it's not going to be reactive enough, and then it's going to cool again. It's going to ventilate to cool down, so temperature is going to go down. Then it's going to be too cold, so it's going to heat again and ventilate and heat and ventilate, and then it's really not efficient, and we're losing a lot of energy this way. So that's what we want to avoid. Here, there's an example of this is basically one of our customer that has, how can I explain that? On the top part of the plot, you have a yellow band that represent the target that the farmer wanted to have. So like the interval of temperature that was okay for her to have in her greenhouse. And on the lower part, you have like all those orange lines represent the heater running. So we can see that the temperature was oscillating during the night, and during the day the sun was kind of keeping it in the range. And the oscillation part, to give you an idea, is 1 degree Celsius. So that's like a decent precision that we see in greenhouses for a customer. And then I wanted to compare that to the same greenhouse, but controlled with like a home thermostat that we often see in greenhouses as well. And here's the difference. So I guess the thermostat was on a different target, but we can see that it was oscillating a lot. And at its worst, it was in an hour, like the temperature change of 20 degrees Celsius, so 40 Fahrenheit. And that's huge temperature swings that the plants will suffer from it, because when it's getting too hot too quickly, it causes the humidity to drop. So like the plant is going to feel super dry, and then when the temperature is going to go down, the humidity is going to condensate, and it's going to create humidity on the plant and risking to create fungus problems. So like this super big swing of temperature, that's something we want to avoid in the greenhouse. So we want to have something that's a bit more reactive than a thermostat. Okay, so how do we control the temperature then? There's kind of 2 ways of doing it. The typical way, or I called it the old way, is I call it action threshold. So basically, we give threshold for every action that we want to happen. For example, at what temperature do we want the heater to start, and at what temperature do we want it to stop? Then we have to figure for ventilation as well. So when should we start opening the roof, and when should it be fully open? What about the fans and side curtains? So it's a lot of questions that we have to ask on how should I control the equipment so that I will get decent temperature. And then there's another layer that comes on top of that. So what config should I set to get the average, the 24-hour average that I need for my tomatoes, for instance? And then if it's at 10 degrees Celsius or 20 Fahrenheit cooler today, how should I change the configuration so that I will avoid doing the yo-yo I was talking about earlier? And if it's too windy and I have to block the roof, how should we adapt the configuration so it won't so that the temperature is going to be maintained properly? There's a lot of questions there that farmers have to ask themselves, and that's what we faced when we were working on the system in the early days. We were in the greenhouse doing like a lot of tests, trials and errors and stuff, and we realized, oh, that doesn't work. It doesn't make sense that every farmer has to go through all those trials and errors. Like it's just taking too much time, and it's changing all the time. So it's not a good way of doing things. And that's when we realized that we have to find some other way of doing it. And that's when we came up with smart targets system. So instead of having to tell the system what everybody in the greenhouse or every equipment in the greenhouse has to do, it's more of how we just give the system a target, and then the system will figure out itself how to use the equipment. So the goal here is to put as much expertise in the system so that people don't have to figure things out themselves and lose a lot of times in trials and error. And with that, there's a lot of optimization that could be made as well. So that's the second way. That is the smart target versus action thresholds. So how can we save time, more time with automating while automating the temperature? Well, avoiding trials and error, as I just mentioned, we don't want to have like all those questions to answer. And then we want, like, as I said, the temperature has to follow the light received by the plant. So if the system allows to follow that without reconfiguring every day what we want in the greenhouse, then that's another way to save time. And ultimately, if you have some constraint on your equipment, so if you don't want the roof to fly away because it's too windy, then you can use the sense, like the wind sensor, to automatically close it when there are storms. This is very important, and no matter what system you use, there's always risk of failures. And if it happens, you don't want to lose your crops, obviously. So, like an easy way to protect crops from the cold is to just plug a home thermostat on your, like in parallel, on your heaters. So, as I said earlier, it's really not precise, but if your main system fails, then it's going to keep your plant alive. Even though the growing conditions aren't going to be optimal. And this is really a cheap and completely redundant way of protecting your crops. So I really highly recommend it. So how much time do we need? So that was another question people ask us a lot, is how much time will I need to manage the system? And here, as I mentioned earlier, it depends on a few factors. If you have like an action threshold system, then you're going to have to change it a lot, because the outdoor temperature, the wind, solar radiation, when it changes, then your configuration won't be will need to change as well. So that's maybe something to think about when you choose your system. Make sure you have as less questions to answer as possible. The second reason why we would need to change the configuration is the light that is received. So some systems allow you to change the temperature target according to the light scenario. Then I would recommend those systems because it will allow you to have like a better conditions in the greenhouse without having to always reconfigure everything. The last one is a bit harder to automate. So it depends on the growth stage of the plant. So younger plants will need more higher temperatures, and the number of fruits will also affect what the temperature we want. I'm not going to dive into the agronomics of it, like the details, but those two are something that would maybe be interesting to talk in a later webinar. Okay, so at the bottom here, I had what we see in Quebec is that there's greenhouse experts that recommend some temperature to their customers, and then what we did here at Orisha is we created like a configuration that just allowed them to transfer the numbers that they have into their system. They don't need to think about any equipment or what it's going to do. Everything that the system is taking care of everything for them. Okay, now why dehumidifying? That's a really big challenge in the greenhouses, as I mentioned earlier, because that's where problems come from mostly. So here, there's three goals that we want to achieve while controlling humidity. First one is maximizing growth. So when it's too humid, the plant is just gonna stop sweating, and at the same time it's gonna stop photosynthesis, so it's gonna stop its growth, and we want to avoid that. So we want to always make sure that it's dry enough in the greenhouse. Second thing we want to control with the humidity is problems, so diseases, mostly fungus. There we want to keep it dry enough, or at least once in a while it has to be dry enough to cut the development cycle of the fungus. The last one is reducing costs. Well, once again, since we control it with heating and ventilation, we don't want those two to we don't want to use too much energy for nothing. We want to avoid wasting energy, and there it's the control logic that will affect it, and that's quite tricky. First thing to know with humidity control is that we don't want to use the relative humidity, which is in percentage. That's the humidity that we used to. So if it's 80% or 50%, that's what we, as human, we used to talk of humidity in this form. And then for plants, it's different. Like plants don't feel the humidity the same way as we talking about it. So relative humidity is no good. We don't want to use that. We want to use humidity deficit. Maybe there's something else you might have heard of, which is vapor pressure deficit. Both are good, but I'm just going to talk about humidity deficit, but the same principles apply to the other one too. It's called VPD. Maybe people have seen the abbreviation somewhere. And so humidity deficit are going to be in grams of water per square meters. If you're not using the plant language, then the problem is you're going to either need to sacrifice the plant needs, or you're going to need to constantly change the humidity configuration, because relative humidity depends on the temperature if you want to know what the plants feel. So it's always, you always have to do a conversion in your head and on the system. So that's something you want to avoid. I'm just going to try to explain it quickly here. So basically, those are sponges. So the warmer the air is, the more water the air can contain. And that's what the size of the sponge represents. So when it's minus 5 degrees Celsius, so the first sponge, the air cannot hold much water and it's going to condensate. But if it's 23 degrees, so the last sponge, then the air can contain a lot of water. And what is important to know is that the plant doesn't care about the blue part, so the amount of water in the air. The plant doesn't see the difference. What the plants really feel is the gray part of the sponge, so the empty part. And that's what we want to control. We want to make sure that the gray part is not too big nor too small. So if there's no gray part, like the first sponge, the plant won't be able to sweat or to evaporate water, and that's when it's gonna stop growing. But if the gray part of the sponge is too big, then it's gonna be super dry, and the plant is gonna stress, and then once again it's gonna protect itself by closing its pores, and it will just stop growing again. So we want to stay in the middle, and that's what we want to control with our system. So once again, there's kind of two ways of doing it. So the first way, what people were doing before, was doing overrides, so either manually or some system allows to create overrides in the configuration. So what people were doing was just we open ventilation. We start ventilating either with fans or with natural openings, and we heat at the same time. And the goal is to expand the sponge and bring air with less water in it. So either people were doing once at sunrise, or they were programming it with their system in a way where they could do pulses. So just doing a small amount of time they were heating and ventilating, then waiting, then starting again. And this feels like we are losing a lot of energy when we heat and ventilate at the same time, which is true, but the output you will see on your yield is really worth it, because you're going to avoid a lot of problems with diseases, and you're going to increase also the capacity of the plant to grow. You will avoid that the place where the plant is just shutting off and where it stopped growing. So when we control that, when we do it manually, and what is complicated is if we want to be efficient, then when it's more humid outside than inside, it's kind of hard to follow if we should ventilate or not. Then if it's too hot outside, if it's too cold outside, it's going to affect the plant. The temperature of the greenhouse can become too low or too high, what we do in these cases. And then when there's heat waves, it's hard to dehumidify. And what should we do then? So there's still a lot of question. And maybe the biggest one is, how do we control temperature and humidity at the same time, since they're independent and they use the same equipment and so on. So that's when what we realized once again when we're working on it on our special desk there. There's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of questions that need to be answered, and we were just realizing it doesn't make sense that everybody has go through that. So we included that in our system, and here humidity control in greenhouses, there's a lot still to improve, but there's progress, and we can focus on that. So the second way, instead of overrides, you can still use the small target approach, which is basically delegating the complicated stuff to the system, and then you can have micro decision based on thermodynamics and from experience developed on a lot of greenhouses. So that's a cool thing with this approach. Once again, I think we're the only one doing that, but most likely there's other companies that are going to pop up with this approach. So how much time do we need to adjust the system and to control humidity? I said you have to change things often to never, depending on the system you use. If your system is using relative humidity, so percentages, you're going to need to change it a lot depending on the temperature in the greenhouse if you want to do it properly. It's going to take basically a lot of times. And then with outdoor humidity, outdoor temperature, your results are going to change as well. So you're going to need to change it if you want to make sure the conditions are optimal and you're not wasting energy. So there could be a lot of configuration if you want to have like a proper control, or less if you delegate it to a system that allows it. Okay, now circulating air. Why circulating air? This is why do we want to do that? This is easier a bit to understand. Is that when we always shakes air around, moves air around in the greenhouse, we make sure that everything is uniform. But sometimes we don't want that, because when it's too dry for the plants, and the plants is gonna sweat, right? So there's gonna be like a fine layer of water of humid air that's going to stay around the plants, and that would kind of protect it from the dryness. So we typically see that in the summer, whenever all of that ventilation is always on because it's too warm, and there's a lot of air moving, and since it's really warm, it's usually very dry as well. So in those cases, we want to stop the air circulating fan, so the HAF, to reduce the impact on the plant, reduce the stress on the plant. Because once again, if the plant feels that it's too dry, it's just going to protect itself and stop growing, basically. The other part, preventing problem here, we want, like when the dry stress is not a problem, we want to keep them on, because it allows the uniformity of the air first. So that's avoid some cold pocket of air to just condensate on the plants, and then creating humidity that will develop diseases and deficiencies. Oh yeah, so if these pockets are too humid and too dry, then the too humid pockets is just gonna stop the plant from sweating, and then that's cause deficiency problems, especially with calcium, and another one that I'm forgetting right now. So that's pretty much what I just explained, but maybe something I can add was there's some study that's been made with the humidity in the greenhouse. So when it's too dry compared to when it's the right humidity, and they found like a difference in yield of 10%. So that was the study was not about air circulation, but that's still around the humidity that it controls. So how much time do we need to control that? Well, typically people let it run 24/7, and the problem is in the summer, as I just explained. So we just tried something to develop a feature that would allow to to stop the air circulating fan without having to think about it. But if you do it manually, then you're going to need to think about it during the summer, and the rest of the time you won't. But yeah, typically, if the system does it for you, you don't have to think about it. Then misting, I'm seeing time flies, so I'm going to go a bit faster on this one since less people uses it. So why do we want to... Yeah, why misting? So why do we want to use misters? Maximizing growth again. So we want to keep the right amount of humidity in the air to avoid like the gray part of the sponge being too small or too big. And we want to prevent problems. So where misting can help is because there are some insects, some pests that struggle living in more humid environment. And at the same time, the predators that we use to control these pests are more comfortable in more humid environments. So using misters can help control those insects, undesirable insects. But then the problem is if we put water in the air, if it's too humid, it can cause fungal problems. So that's a balance there that we need to find which is the least worst problem. Sorry for that bad English. What do we need for the misting systems? Well, basically, we want to use still the humidity deficit threshold, that will threshold. So when it's too dry, when the gray part of the sponge is too big, we want to trigger some shot of water, and then we want to do pulses. So maybe like every 10 minutes, I want to turn on the valve for 1 minute, and that's what the pulses are going to do. And the last part I mentioned here is you need to have many periods, because you want to make sure it's not going to be too you don't want the mister to start during the night, because you don't want humidity during the night. It's going to be the same for irrigation. We want to make sure things are dry as much as possible during the night. Well, as much as possible in a decent range. How can we save more time with misters? Well, we want to use the humidity deficit, so we don't have to change it. Every time temperature change, we won't have to change the humidity setting. And then sunrise and sunset time. Yeah, so when we define our periods, we want to do it according to the sunrise and sunset time. So during the season, the program that you create will always follow what you want, and you won't need every month to change it because the sun is, well, it's not rising at the same time. How much time do we need to adjust these settings? Well, it depends if you need to play with the time all the time, because the sunrise change, and depends on the pest presence. If you use it to control the Tranix, I think in English, I'm not sure of the name, but bad insects, and then how aggressive you want your system to be. So those are kind of the configuration you would need to change more. So depending on your restorations, maybe you can assume a few times a year. So it's not that much. The last aspect we want to control is irrigation, and there's 3 ways of doing it. First one is with timers. So that's what we were used to see more often. It's just people saying, okay, at that I don't know, 10, 11, and 12, I want to irrigate for 5 minutes, for instance. Here, the important part is that it has to follow how much light the plant has received. Because the more light, the more transpiration, the more sweating. So the more water the plant needs. A bit like humans be on that side. Another way is to use the soil humidity. So using sensors, as I presented earlier, we have tensiometers, which basically talk or speak the language of the plant. So once again, it's different in the humidity in the soil than in the air. We tensiometers can really read measure, we can remeasure what we need and what the plant needs, and so we can irrigate directly from depending on that reading. The problem is with tensiometers are the problem is that it's really finicky. Like it's really hard to set up and it needs energy, and a lot of people are just finding it too much time to handle. So tensiometers are interesting, but it's a bit complicated to use, let's say. Then you have TDR sensors, which is we can see a lot of them. Those are cheaper, but the problem is that the reading that it does depends of a lot of things, and you cannot use it directly to know when to irrigate. So maybe it's important to be careful with this one. The best compromise here is probably the light that we receive. So using it like a solar radiation sensor will allow us to approximate how much light the plant has received, and then depending on that, we will know how much water to irrigate. That's an approximation. It's not as precise as tensiometers, but it's way easier to use, and you just need one for all the greenhouse you might have. Tensiometers are very, very local, so maybe using just one won't be like a representative enough. Here I put a warning again. When you're using sensors to irrigate, make sure you can set different target or different threshold depending on the time of the day, because once again we don't want it to start during the night or early before soon before night. So recommendations, if you're looking for the cheapest option, timers, that works quite well if and only if you can have different scenarios of timers. So you don't want to reconfigure it every day, but if it's sunny one day, if it's cloudy the next day, you don't want to send as much water to your plant, because it's not going to need it, and then the water is going to sit in the ground, it's going to rot, basically. You're going to have problems. So timers are interesting if you can relate the amount of water to the how much light the plant has received. The most precise option are tensiometers, but once again, they're finicky to use, so it's a bit challenging. It takes maybe more time to get started with those. And the most efficient, I would say, are using pyranometers. This is basically a solar radiation sensor, and that would be like a good estimates, and you could use that to irrigate. And I added tensiometers so that you can diagnose how long should you irrigate at a time. And if you see that in your greenhouse you have two different tomato plants or cucumber plants that don't have the same look, and you're wondering why are they different, like they all have the same conditions, but sometimes we don't see it in the ground. So having tensiometers to be able to poke in the soil and see, oh, are both places as humid, or is there a place that because there's a slope or something that gets all the water, then we can avoid problem knowing that. So it can be interesting to diagnose problem like this. How much time do we need to control the irrigation? Well, as I said earlier, if you have no ways of relating the how much water you send to the light received, then you're going to need to change it quite often. So I wrote once a day here for that. And then once again, if you have different periods, you want that to follow the sun time, so sunrise and sunset time. The plant balance here, if your plants is putting all his energy in the stem and in the leaves and stuff, you will see that you're going to have problems with your fruits. There's going to be quality problems with the fruits. So in these cases, you can tell the plant or hint the plant to put more energy in the fruit instead of in the stem, the leaves, and the root. And you can do that with irrigation, basically by just extending. Playing with the how much water you give at a time, and how much time you wait between two irrigation. But that's a bit more advanced. Maybe I'm not going to go too much in detail here. Then soil type, yeah. So if you never calibrated your soil. So if you don't know how much time you have to irrigate and you're irrigating too much, you can have problems, and maybe you're going to want to play with that. But if you have tensiometers, it can help you like analytically know how much time you need. But if you don't, maybe you're going to play more with that. So more trial and error here. And the last one, yeah, I talked about it, the light received. So depending on the configuration you have with your system, you can go from once a day, you're going to need to change the configuration, or a few times a year, depending on the plant stage as well. Okay, so last part about the systems, or no, I have another one after that. Here you have like data visualization. This is important, as I mentioned earlier, because you want to be able to notice what is wrong, or if there's a problem, or if it's following what I told it to do. Sometimes you can see that, oh, the soil is really dry, but is it the system fault, or is there something with the automation's fault, or is there something with the system that is blocked or something? So this is the kind of insight you can have here. And the one that is very important, okay, I can explain it really quickly. On the first plot here on the top is, as I mentioned earlier, the yellow band is the target, and the colorful band, the colorful line is the temperature. On the right of it, you have like the average. Oh, sorry, it's in French. But yeah, the band on the right are the average, so the day average, the 24-hour average, the day average, and the night average. And those are useful to hint the plants on where to put his energy and help it grow better. The second plot is the equipment activity. So you know when equipment has started or not. So this is interesting to diagnose problem and to understand what happens. The blue line is for this customer, it was a roof opening. So we can see the roof opening in percentages. So it went to about 40%, I think, in here. And the other lines on top, in the middle, the 4 lines are fans that are started. At the bottom, we see humidity by humidity deficit. So the higher the deficit, the drier it is. And on the right again, you have the average for the humidity. So in you have a quick overview of pretty much the basic of everything you need here. And this is one, like we chose to do visualization like this without any configuration, so it can be really easy to have like a quick overview of what happened during the day, and you don't need to configure anything, and you need two clicks and you get all this information. There's other plus as well, but this is the main one. And the difference is you have other system like this one here that took another approach and decided to allow more customization. But the downside of it is that it takes more time, because every time you have to enter what graphs you want. So what are the configuration, data interval, start date, and so on and so forth. So if you're a geek of data, you maybe want more control like this one. But as I said earlier, otherwise we want the easiest solution possible. That would be my advice. Because we want really to take the habit of checking it, and if it's too complicated, we won't. Okay, so this is really the last one, alerts. So what are the different alerts that you can find in the automation system? The main ones are the one I put on the right in bold. So the temperature, this is probably the one that's going to affect your plants the quickest, especially if you go into extremes. So we want to be alerted if that happens. If, for instance, a heater has bugged or has a problem and it's cold outside, we want to be noticed so that your plants won't freeze. The second one and the third one here are mostly to make sure that you will receive the temperature alert. So if there's a problem with the sensor or with internet or something, you want to be noticed so you won't have a false sense of security. Then you can have more alerts with what I put on the right. You have soil humidity, air humidity, pressure. So you can diagnose more problems with that. Or be alerted of if there's something happening with that, but those are less important. Here you have a few possibilities of systems you can look for. You're gonna have the PDF, so I'm not gonna go too far into details here. What we decided to do this year is to offer like a quick, a simplified version of the system to allow people who are starting out and have already a lot of investment made and are wondering if doing it manually won't be a better option, because automation is still another expense on top of everything, or another investment. So we went with a simplified version that would be easier on the cash flow for people who want to start up. Oh, and if you want to upgrade later to a better version, the neat part is that you only pay the difference between the two systems. So you don't need to throw away the first one and buy a completely new one. How to automate your greenhouse. Okay, so in a few steps, you need to get an idea of what you want in terms of equipment, call suppliers and greenhouse manufacturers to make sure the budget is fitting, and then choose your automation partner. I'm sorry, I forgot to plug my laptop. Making sure it won't die. Okay, sorry for that. Once you choose the automation, then we go with installation. I'm going to talk a bit more about this in the next slides. And after that, some companies offer training and helps configure the system. So that's something maybe you want to ask if it's a service that's offered, because it can help to get started at this point. And the last part is the day-to-day, how to use the system. And we have another webinar in 2 weeks about that, to kind of more concretely show what every steps look like. So automation transition, yeah, here a bit of warning. These days, procurement delays, like if you want to have your greenhouse automated for next year, just start really early to plan things, because everything is slow these days for labor and supply chain problems. There's just make sure you're not too short in time. Second problem, availability, suppliers and installers. So once again, increase your estimates of time. And the installation here, a lot of problem can happen, so you want to make sure you have as much support as you can. Either some people decide to install it themselves, some people go with electricians, other people can have certified installers. So here it's something you want to maybe to get more information about it from the beginning, because it can be a challenge, and you can once again need more time than you expected. And I have an advice again here: when you if you hire an electrician, make sure he has experience with control systems, because a lot of electricians are used to work in new houses, for instance, and it's pretty much always the same task that you need to do. But with control system, it's more complicated, and we've seen a lot of problems with electrician not sure how to do things here. So just that's my advice for you. And return on investment. Here I'm going back to the 18 to 35 kilos that we see people, the range that we see people in. So maybe first thing for you is to figure out where in this range you are, and where you want to go, maybe, or where you think you can go with a better climate control. And to give an idea, for 3,000 square foot greenhouse, if you only producing tomatoes, and for the cost, the price of tomatoes right now, only an increase of 1 kilo per square meter represent about $2,400 increase per year in sales. So that can quickly becomes more interesting to automate for that. And this only counts the increase in yield, doesn't count how much time you save with the automation, or maybe employee time. So for the return on investment, everyone is different, but you can maybe estimate how it is for you this way. Okay, so that's pretty much the end of what I had to talk about today. As I said, it's a big overview of a lot of things. I didn't have time to go into details, but if you have questions now, you can ask it now. If you have questions later, we're gonna send you. We just created a Facebook group to help people who wants to get started with automation to be able to ask their questions, so that we can help share what we know on automation and help people get their project off the ground. And yeah, so we're going to send that in the following email with all the information about the webinar. So do you guys have any questions? Once again, you can either write in the chat or unmute the microphone.
Is your product available in Europe?
Where are you in Europe?
In Austria.
In Austria. Right now, we never sell to Europe so far, but it's something we're considering. So if you're interested in our product, maybe we can discuss it further.
Okay. Thank you.
Do you have any question on controls in general, or what are your challenges right now? I'm interested in Europe. What are the challenges?
The challenges. It's quite a new, very small CSA,
Okay.
and we have two very simple greenhouses, polytunnels with side ventilation.
Okay.
But they are not double layer, so we don't heat or we don't have any technical equipment. We open by hand.
Okay.
Yeah, that's quite simple. And we now have a small greenhouse at a building, on the side of the building for the small plants, producing the small plants. And there we have an automatic opening of the roof, which is our first step of automation.
Yeah.
But till now we don't have. We have installed an electric heating, quite simple. It's mobile, and we are thinking about heating with biomass for next year, but step by step.
Yeah, baby steps.
And it's very small. This greenhouse has 50 square meters.
Okay, and so that's the third one you mentioned next to the building.
Yes.
Okay. And why did you come here? Where were you watching the webinar this morning? What were your goals?
This morning, this afternoon, we have late afternoon.
Yeah, sorry, this afternoon for you. Yeah.
Yes, certainly.
What time is it? Like 4?
Yes, it was 4. Now it's 5.
Okay.
Yes, I don't think I can go. I don't want to go deep into automation, but I'm thinking about what steps of investment should I do, which keep it open for the future, to start now with something I can develop and year by year maybe put some automation in, or optimization of plant growth and so on.
Okay, well, from what you said, I think because you're manually opening the side curtains right now, right?
On that big tunnel.
Well, from what I understand, maybe irrigation or the ventilation would be maybe the next step to automate.
For irrigation, that's true. For irrigation, we have some automation. So I have a time. It's just a time control where I can put in 3 times a day some water.
And does it work well? I mean, like, do you see problem with your plants, or do you see?
The problem is, as you mentioned, if there is different weather and no sunlight or less sunlight and cooler day and I don't think about it, and it continues watering as the day before when it was really hot.
Yeah. Okay. That gives me an idea. And so not sure if it can help you, but if you're looking to automate the irrigation, there's a lot of solution in irrigation. We have a solution too that goes integrated with the rest, so yeah, that's not the part I want to talk about. It's more for ventilation. I know that if you don't want to go all in automation, I think the two options I know that could be interesting are the starter kit that I was talking about earlier, and what the products that we have. But there's also some systems that are quite simple, and you don't have any interface, or it's really simple, and you can. I think it's around 700 or like it's a few $100, and you can control both sides with it. But you need the motors in the first place. So if it can help you, that can be the options I could see here for you.
Yes, and do you mean a special system for controlling this, or is it a product of Orisha or something else?
Well, Orisha, we have like the starter kit that can
Yes.
control that for you. The starter kit doesn't come with irrigation though. But if you don't only have that, maybe it's not that expensive to go with the full kit for irrigation and the side curtains. But there's also other systems that are not from us and that are kind of not a thermostat, but kind of a thermostat, but to control motors to open and close. And I'm not sure if they're still sold, but here in Quebec there was this TC4 and TC7 that were doing it.
Okay.
In Europe, maybe you have different systems, but maybe you can find an equivalent to that. And from what I heard, it's a few, I don't know, between 500 and 1,000 for the part that is automating the motors of the side curtains.
Okay.
Because I guess that can take you a lot of times, right?
Yes, but still, I need some control system which informs me if the temperature rises, because if it's broke and I don't care because it does it on its own, then so I need an additional technique which gives me alerts then.
Yeah. Well, then if you're looking for everything integrated and to have something that you can build on in the future, maybe our solution can be interesting for you. If you want, we can talk about it more on some other time.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. Just call us if you have questions.
Okay. Thank you.
No worries. Kristen, did you have any questions?
Hi, I'm actually seeding as we speak during this webinar. Got a bunch of trays on my floor.
How you doing?
Multitasking. Good. Yeah.
Good.
Doing all the peppers and green onions right now, so happy to get those started. We're still setting up our seedling room, so it should be able to put in there next week. But right now they're just in my room. Yeah, I mean the biggest question. So I already got the Orisha system. And the electrician took a long time to get the electricity brought to the greenhouse because we didn't have any. It's like in a kind of out of the way spot. And it's a community organization. So it's a very small, like more popular education style.
Okay.
And yeah, it's mostly to do our seedlings more in the spring. That's like why we built the greenhouse. It's 24 by 25 feet, so pretty small. But we also, of course, want to use the space during the rest of the season to produce vegetables because there's still a whole space. So yeah, we like have installed electricity and the box and everything, the control box, but I haven't actually attached any of the sensors or done the automation yet. So I guess that's my step for the spring to get that working. So yeah, it's kind of like the installation part, and we also have to like set up an irrigation system still. And I guess we have to buy the on-off switch for that separately, because I have the subscription for the irrigation, but not any of the actual hardware yet.
Okay, so you said you need the switch to turn on. That was for irrigation, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so do you have like it's the valves you're talking about, like the solenoid valves?
Yeah, I think the valves to
Yeah.
attach basically.
Okay. Yeah, it's pretty sure you can find it where you buy your greenhouse or stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking
where are you from,
La
Christian?
Shop Agricole, I got a quote from them for irrigation, so I might get everything from them. We have smart pots, so it's pretty modular. Because it was built on like literally a cement floor.
Yeah.
So I'll probably just do like spaghetti irrigation, like drip irrigation. And yeah, the other question that I would ask is just like, since we haven't ever had to have any irrigation, I like know how to grow things in the field, but not as much in a greenhouse setting, like what the settings would be. So I think I asked in the chat a bit earlier if there's like fiche de culture, like a table with the actual settings that are useful for each crop, because I haven't had to have that level of precision before.
Oh, I missed the chat. I'm sorry. The difference here. Depends which one. I can probably find some, but what I used to see is more tomatoes and cucumbers, but I'm not that like I wouldn't recommend you some settings for your plants, because I wouldn't be sure enough to know. I wouldn't be able to give you like proper tips. I'm sorry for that one, but like maybe I can find some fish for the culture. But what culture do you grow in there? Is this like a bunch of different diversified things, or?
Yeah, I mean it's kind of a nice experimental space, but I did tomatoes last year, and I want to do cucumbers also this year. Last year I did tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, and then like some herbs basically, and we threw in some lettuce and stuff in the fall, like greens. So this year we'll probably do a similar thing of like having a couple different crops. Cucumbers being maybe more the main one, more cucumbers, since those are really popular last year. And then yeah, like herbs, and maybe a couple like hot peppers, a couple loofahs. We want to do loofahs in there because it's you actually have the space and you have a long enough season to try it out. So there'll be a couple experimental things, but I think I'd like set the greenhouse for cucumbers basically. And then everything else will do like well enough with the cucumbers.
I'm gonna check. I can maybe find some. There's a source where there's a lot of information, but it's in French.
Oh, that's fine. You can send me anything
fine?
in French. Yeah, I work in French even though I'm Anglo.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I'll try to see if I can find something and I'll send it to you.
Great, thank you.
No worries. And I think I missed your first question. Did I reply? Did I answer your first question?
I mean, it's just that I don't know if I have a specific question. I just know I have to set things up in the next couple of weeks, and I'm like, we'll figure it out. But I think the instructions are, there's all the instructions on your website and stuff for the connection. Yeah. It's pretty straightforward, but
we try to make it as understandable as possible. But if you have any question, don't hesitate to call us. We're here to help.
Yeah, I think I've talked to Frederic before.
Yeah.
Yeah,
he's really good. Yeah.
This is me. I've talked to you a couple times.
Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you too. Yeah, it took a long time to get things set up, so it'll be good to actually start the subscription and stuff this year, just because yeah, it's like a community project that's kind of evolving, and also you have to like always get more financing to be able to go for each step.
Yeah.
So it's a little slower, but the good thing is I have a lot of human resources because we have a lot of volunteers. So like we just watered everything by hand this year, and it was fun.
That's another way of doing things.
Yeah, unpaid labor. But it's a collective greenhouse, so everyone who comes every time you like harvest and share all the vegetables with them. So, and it's only going to them basically, so it works out all right. But it would be nice to automate a little more, especially for the just have regular irrigation, because I got even though there's calcium in the soil, just there wasn't even enough water for the tomatoes, especially they're getting blossom end rot and stuff, especially the earlier ones. So I think just having more consistency in the irrigation and stuff will help with that already.
Yeah, that will help. If there's a problem after that, and you can change the plan, irrigation plan, so it's more easy to follow what could have gone wrong. What could have gone wrong? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll try to check for the culture if I can find you some information about irrigation, and I'll send it to you.
Great. Thanks.
Today.
Amazing. I'll take a look at it. Yeah, it's starting to be the busy season now, so a lot of stuff to do at once, but also exciting to be planting things.
Is it your second year? Is that it?
Well, I've been in this job for 3 seasons. This is my 4th season.
Okay.
And I manage 5 collective gardens, and then we built the greenhouse 2 years ago. The beginning of the pandemic was kind of delayed, but we got a greenhouse now because we needed somewhere to do our seedlings. And before we were in Pointe Saint Charles. I'm not sure if you know the Montreal area, but it's very south in Montreal. And then everyone was busing to McGill before I was in this post, apparently, to go to their greenhouse to do the seedlings every day. And I was just we need a greenhouse here.
Yeah.
So now we have one, and we're moving it forward.
Cool. Well, if you have any question for setting things up or whatever, do not hesitate to call or write us, and we'll see how we can help.
Thank you. Yeah.
No worries. Okay, so if there's no more question, I think that will be it for today. 3 seconds, maybe. Someone. All right. So I wish you all a very fine day and weekend, and thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.